getting some encoder errors. Try inserting a few decoder errors to counteract it.
Well, that'll be tonight's introduction because I got it to start recording.
Oh,
Good
okay.
evening, and welcome to our Friday night Bible study. And of course, it may not be evening where you are, but
Beginning.
or when you watch this, we say evening because it is our Friday night Bible study, and because we usually plan for it to show up on the group about 6 p.m. on Friday. So,
Howdy.
hello. It has been a pretty crazy day. My wife was taking a shower on Wednesday and she complained that the water was getting cold. I'd already had mine, so I didn't notice, but I took her word for it and thought, well, maybe the water heater doesn't have the capacity it used to have. Or we had just had it relit, so that means that the gas company man had set the temperature instead of us. So, maybe he set it lower than we're used to. But then yesterday, when I went to take another shower, I couldn't get any hot water. So I went to the hot water heater and I tried to light it, and I couldn't get any joy out of it. Couldn't get it to light. Didn't really know what I was doing, but still, it wasn't lighting. So I called the company that installed it back in 2018, and they asked me when it was put in. I read the date they wrote on it, and they said, well, it's probably under warranty. We'll have to see if the parts are available, and if they're not, we'll get them tomorrow. Well, they didn't show up yesterday. They showed up this morning, and he had the part. And so he went to all the work of switching the part out. We got the thing to light, but the flame went out right after that, and then he couldn't get it to relight. Couldn't even get the pilot to light, much less anything else. So, all right, he said, I guess we're going to have to replace the whole thing. So he had to drive off to the shop, and then they came and back and they swapped it out. So he didn't do the job quite right. He didn't attach the flue properly. And I had told him we're going to have to go up in the attic and get that flue reattached properly. He said, oh, no, it'll go right up through. And so he didn't do it. Well, I got up there, and sure enough, it wasn't connected properly. And he'd already lit the thing, so the flue was too hot to work with. So I had to wait until the water got hot and the thing shut off and the part set for a bit so it had a chance to cool off. And then I got the flue all hooked up. And then I finally was able to take my shower. And wouldn't you know it, we had somebody else scheduled to show up this afternoon. He showed up while I was in the shower, so nobody could go open the door. Till I got out of the shower, got dried, and got dressed.
Thankfully, we have texting and phones.
Yeah, she called. She had a pretty good idea who it was.
Yeah, I needed my chair serviced, and I called his boss, and I said, hey, I think he's out there, and I can't get to the door, and my husband's in the shower. So he texted him, and the guy patiently waited.
Yeah. So it has been kind of a crazy day. Had a little something I wanted to show folks here. I showed you some pictures a few weeks back that I had of some bulb-based flowers in our yard. They're usually the first things to bloom in spring. Well, earlier this week, I was out with the phone, which I use as a camera, and we had some flowers in the yard. So I got some pictures. These are pretty small flowers, and they're growing out near our crepe myrtle. Let's see, I think I need to go over here. This is a fairly large shrub that grows beside the house. And my wife particularly likes this flower. Didn't get a whole lot of blooms this year.
It's been a few years since we have.
Well, I think what I was doing is I had a lot of time in the yard, and I would cut this thing way back, and then 2 years after I cut it way back, we get a whole bunch of blooms on it. And I just haven't been out there to do that so much anymore.
We had a fire.
Well, that too.
That tree, that bush.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any good blooms on it since.
And then this is a little shrub. It still hasn't really thrived, but it is doing a little bit better. When we moved in, this shrub was in a wooden kind of bucket thing, and the wood was deteriorating, and it was just sitting there. And I didn't particularly like where it was, so I dug a hole in the lawn and transplanted the shrub from the bucket into the lawn. And it's finally beginning to thrive a little bit. It's not as much as I would like, but it's as you can see, we got a few flowers out of it.
Roughly 20 years ago.
What was that?
Just living.
Were you asking how long we've been in the house?
No, I'm saying we've been in the house close to 20 years.
Well, it's getting close to 20 years, yeah.
It was, we hadn't been here long at all when you transferred that thing. And it just isn't really thriving, but it is surviving.
Yeah. Well, there was a year or two there when I wasn't sure it would survive, but it has managed to pull through. The problem with putting it in the lawn is that I have to trim around it with a weed whacker. And if you're not careful, that can do damage to it.
I thought you had it in the flower bed.
No, I didn't put it in the flower bed. Maybe I should have. Well, anyway, was trying to think what else was going on this week. Of course, we had storms overnight in I found a storm chaser who tries to live stream. He has a lot of trouble with it because storms don't choose to go through well covered areas for wireless service, and these guys who stream storm chasing, they have to use wireless service. I mean, you're in a vehicle, you can't use wired service, so they're using wireless internet connections, which is through the cell phone network, and so sometimes their stream drops out on them.
And contrary to what some people believe, if you don't like the path that the storm is taking, it won't do you any good to call the weather service and ask them to send the storm somewhere else.
Right.
I knew somebody who did that because they didn't like the direction the hurricane was headed.
Yeah. Well,
it wasn't me.
This guy He was chasing storms through Kansas down into Oklahoma one day this week, and then the night when we really had the storms, he had gone over into Indiana, and I think he was at least planning to cross over, but then I found somebody else that we watched that was providing wall-to-wall coverage, and so I watched him instead of the other guy, and they were tracking storms I think in Kentucky was where they were finding some tornadoes being confirmed as coming down. So anyway, it's just another week, and we are here to go through the book of Genesis. So let's bow our heads and we can get started from where we left off last week. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings to us. We thank you for the written word. We thank you for each other and the opportunity to come together and to share in something of a group way. We want to make sure that what we do is useful and of eternal value. So we ask that your Holy Spirit will guide us toward that eternal value, both as a group and then with each of us individually. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, find where my cursor is there so I can switch over, and then we can get over here. Now, we read this section here on the births of Esau and Jacob. I might go over that again just a little bit. This is the account of the family of Isaac, the son of Abraham. When Isaac was 40 years old, he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Padan Aram, and the sister of Laban the Aramean. Hello?
Hello. What? I just coughed.
Oh, okay. Anyway, so, we know the age of Abraham when Isaac was born, 100. So when Isaac gets married, Abraham is 140. And he's still got 35 years left to go. And at any rate, we had already read about how he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Padan Aram, and the sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was unable to have children. The Lord answered Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins. But the two children struggled with each other in her womb, so she went to ask the Lord about it. "Why is this happening to me?" she asked. And the Lord told her, "The sons in your womb will become two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals, not only the nations, but the sons as well. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son." Now, we haven't said a whole lot about that sentence other than we're going to pay more attention to it later. But some of you might begin to have a sense of what's going on here based on what we have said in this group in the past, particularly when we read through the book of Hebrews, about who serves whom. The older son...
I've got some things to say about that passage.
What?
I've got some things to say about that passage.
Well, I'll give you a moment. I'll give you a moment in just a second here. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son. Now, older and younger is by just minutes because these are twins. But in that culture, the firstborn was still important, even if they were twins. It's just the nature of things. They don't come out together, so the one that comes out first is the firstborn. And it was important in that culture that one be the firstborn and the other one be younger. Even though, they'd had their birthday on the same day and be the same age, One was older and one was younger. And so she was told the older son would serve the younger son. And when the time came you wanted to say something about that.
Yeah, the, those parents each had their own favorite child.
Oh, yeah. Mm.
Now, what did I just happened to notice this, the description of her pregnancy. The boys struggled with each other while in the womb, and their mother didn't know what was going on, and she went to the Lord and asked about it.
Yeah.
According to that, their rivalry started before they were born. But I have to wonder, and I'm not any kind of counselor or anything, I just have to wonder, babies in the womb, babies plural, well, baby singular move around in the womb. But when you've got more than one in there, you're going to have extra movement.
Yeah.
I would think would be normal.
And she didn't have previous experience with childbearing to have any clue, right?
And they didn't have any way of taking an x-ray to find out how many babies were in there.
Yeah.
So she's wondering what's going on. She's wondering, when they're born, she's got her favorite, Dad's got his favorite. The rivalry may have, the movement in the womb was normal. The rivalry may have been programmed into the children
By the parents.
based on the definition that whoever wrote that passage gave it.
Yeah.
They may have been programmed to believe that they were supposed to be enemies.
Well, there was a certain natural difference between the two as well, as we're going to see.
Yeah.
But
Which would be mom having her favorites, so she teaches her child to like the things that she likes, and dad has his favorite, and he wants to impress dad and be close to dad, so he does the things that dad likes.
Yeah. And
remember that the parents did not have a courtship. They were an arranged marriage.
very
So
much,
they
yes.
may not have been compatible. There may be a reason it took her a while to get pregnant. That her husband didn't have any desire for her.
Well,
Those are tips.
I'm going to say that from here, and even to a certain extent before here, but certainly from here on out in the book of Genesis, we are going to read about how family dysfunction gets passed on from generation to generation.
Are you speaking of when he passed her off as his sister?
Well, that's going to happen too. We're going to read that soon. But just
And again,
Just-
they were related.
Yeah.
More incest.
what I'm thinking of is just how problems, because parents aren't entirely always wise. I mean, they're human. They make mistakes, right?
Right.
Parents make mistakes, causes problems for the kids. Kids grow up and have their own kids. They make mistakes because of the mistakes that their parents made. And so this gets passed on.
Now, even the perfect parent can have a kid turn out with a bad character.
Yes.
And who's the perfect parent? There's only been one.
Right.
And that would be God the Father. And what happened to his children? Or the Creator? What happened to the children that Jesus created?
Well, one of them became a problem. And that one then spread problems throughout the place where God lives that we call heaven, and managed to export his problems to our planet and our race.
And yet the perfect parent failed.
Yeah.
Failed to achieve a child with perfect character.
Well, I think we could say that.
Bad about how their children turn out and blame themselves when their kids mess up, but it may not be your fault.
Well, no, I mean, that's one of the principles that we espouse in this group is personal freedom of choice followed by personal responsibility. And when we say things like, we had trauma when we were children and this causes problems for us, we are not, by saying that, trying to pass blame off on somebody else. We bear responsibility for the decisions we make. Now, we might be able to explain some of the reasons why we made those decisions. We might be able to explain why it is hard and difficult for us to get out of the cycle of mistake, leading to maladjustment, leading to further mistakes, leading to attempts to cover up, leading to even further mistakes, and round and round and round we go.
Leading to suicide.
But in the end, we are responsible for our own choices. So explaining the causal factors behind choices does not absolve an individual of responsibility for the choices they make. We say that to be understanding of a person, but also at the same time recognizing that, like us, they need help getting into a better state. That in and of themselves, they can't fix the problem no more than we, in and of ourselves, can ultimately fix our problems. We need that reparenting. We need to be born from above.
But be warned that when you're reparented, you can be re-traumatized.
Well, that's why it is so important to properly understand who we are reparenting to, and that's why we focus so much on the goodness of the character of God, because he is the trustworthy parent for reparenting us that will not let us down and will not fail us, will not abuse us, will not shame us because of our mistakes.
Unconditionally.
Yeah, and in case you couldn't hear that, she said loves us unconditionally. You get muted.
No matter what we have done, he's not going to turn his back on us.
Right. Well, reading on.
Probably we turn our backs on him, and when it reaches the point that there's no pathway left for him to try to reach us, he gives up, and with tears lets us go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we get into big trouble.
Yep. And when the time came to give birth, Rebekah discovered that she did indeed have twins. The first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair like a fur coat. So they named him Esau. Esau, I think it said down here, sounds like the Hebrew that means hair. He's also, though, called in some places Edom. We're going to see that in a moment, which means red. So he uses both names. Then the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. So he had been married for 20 years before these boys were born. So by that time, Abraham was 160 years old and only had 15 years left. So Abraham would have died when his twin grandsons were 15, roughly. Now, here comes the first of the story of all the nonsense going on between these two boys. As the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman. But Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home. But Rebekah loved Jacob. Now we might wonder, why would she love Jacob? Well, this is going to sound a little bit crass, but Jacob was probably more of a mama's boy. Wouldn't you think? Like to stay at home, like to hang around where mama was?
Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, she may have misinterpreted what was told to her. It says she inquired of the Lord. Usually that would have been done through some sort of an intermediary or a seer. And we're not told who the seer was, if in fact that's how she did it. But she got told that the older would serve the younger. And it could well be that in her mind then, the younger, the one born second, younger by only a few minutes most likely. The younger, since the older was going to serve him, then in her mind and in the culture that she grew up in, the servants are the lowlifes, and the people that get the service of the servants, they're the great ones and the big shots. So
she misunderstood the tense.
The what?
The tense. The meaning in which the prediction came.
All right, explain that.
She may have taken it to be God prescribing this is the way to be versus God predicting this is the way it's going to be. I may have said that backwards.
Yeah, well, let's not get...
He believed that God intended for the youngest to be in charge when he actually was saying, hey, this is what's going to happen.
Well, that element of it, and it's not really the tense. Then it would be whether we are to understand the the um, the statement as being prescriptive rather than predictive. How was it intended? At any rate, Mom had her favorite, Dad had his favorite, and whenever a parent has a favorite child, that's a recipe for trouble. Even in our day, if parents display a clear preference for one child over the others, they are setting their children up for lots and lots of grief in the future. One day, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau arrived home from the wilderness, exhausted and hungry. Esau said to Jacob, "I'm starved. Give me some of that red stew." This is how Esau got his other name, Edom, which means red. Well, yeah, except he was red when he was born, so did it have to do with the red stew, or was that just part of the reason they called him red? "All right," Jacob replied, "but trade me your rights as the firstborn son." "Look, I'm dying of starvation," said Esau. "What good is my birthright to me now?" But Jacob said, "First, you must swear that your birthright is mine." So Esau swore an oath, thereby selling his rights as the firstborn to his brother Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and lentil stew. Esau ate the meal, then got up and left. He showed contempt for his rights as the firstborn. Now, a lot of people, when they read the last verse of this chapter, this is chapter 25, a lot of people, when they read this last verse of chapter 25, they take it as pejorative. Esau was, huh?
I don't know that word.
Well, I'm about to explain it for you. Esau, in this interpretation, was a bad boy. He should have valued his birthright more. He showed a character flaw when he despised or showed contempt for his birthright or for his rights as the firstborn.
How about entitlement?
And in that case, as we read this part of the story, which one of these boys is showing a sense of entitlement?
I would say the one that sold his birthright. Because there's no way Dad's going to take it away from me and give it to him. I'm the firstborn. I'm the one who's entitled to it. So I can sell it and not worry about the consequences because I'm going to get it anyway.
Well, but did he?
No.
But what?
Well, he did in the end, didn't he?
Well, I think maybe now is a good time to point out here that the traditional interpretation of the story of this family is that he showed contempt for a certain thing here, and then later got distressed when he didn't get it. Because they make the mistake of thinking that it's the same thing. That what's talked about here is what's talked about in the next chapter. But the language is different. What's happening here involves the rights of the firstborn. Well, what were the rights of the firstborn? Well, the firstborn would inherit the bulk of the wealth. The firstborn would get all the tents and all the servants and all the flocks. Well, the most of them, anyway.
That's like Esau got.
Well,
Dad found a way to disinherit Jacob.
That's an interesting theory. I'm not sure that's what's going on. But when you read the earlier section here about the characters and the predispositions of the two boys, what interest would an outdoorsman have in becoming a leader of this nomadic group? Being tied down to the tents and the flocks. You see what I'm saying?
Well, he ended up the leader of them anyway.
Well, in a sense.
Jacob sent Esau away without the bride price, knowing he would have to stay there.
You've gotten your names mixed up.
What'd I say?
You said Jacob sent Esau away. Yeah.
Oh, well.
What you meant was Isaac sent Jacob away without the bride price.
Yeah. And knowing that he would have to stay there long enough to earn the bride price, the dowry. Only he got more than he bargained for because he ended up staying long enough to purchase the bride.
Well, why don't we discuss that part of the story when we get to it instead of...
I love jumping ahead. It gives you such a hard time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way I read this last verse is just not necessarily pejorative, just an indication of the preferences of the two boys.
Well, I've already forgot the meaning of the word majority.
Well, pejorative means you're casting negative. I'm trying to find simple words for it. Negative allegations about a person's character. If you're trying to say that somebody's bad, that's pejorative.
You're making an insinuation.
Yeah. So a lot of people read this bit about despising or showing contempt for his birthright or for his rights as the firstborn and say, oh, well, that shows what a bad character Esau had. No wonder God didn't choose him. I'm going to suggest a different interpretation here as we go on to the next chapter. It's just, in my mind, it's just a revelation of who the two boys are. Jacob liked staying at home. He liked being in the tents. He liked dealing with the flocks and the herds and hanging around with all the household help. That was his thing. It wasn't his brother's thing. So his brother's looking at his rights as the firstborn, and, well, Jacob is wanting the tents and the household servants and the flocks and herds and all that. And that's not all that attractive to Esau.
But
It doesn't float his boat the way it does Jacob's boat.
look how he acted.
What do you mean how he acted?
When he found out that his when he found out that Isaac had given away the blessing, pronounced the birthright on Jacob,
See, you're making the same mistake most people make.
he's upset.
No. You're making the same mistake most people make when they read this story. They
Well, I'm
think
asking for an explanation.
they think that what Esau sold here is what his father intended to give to him later. But I'm going to argue that they're two different things.
Are you saying he wanted the priesthood?
Yeah. Chapter 26. Isaac deceives Abimelech. This is going to be a familiar story. We've already read it twice. Abraham did it in Egypt. Abraham did it to Abimelech. Now we're going to read about Isaac doing it. A severe famine now struck the land as it happened before in Abraham's time. So Isaac moved to Gerar, where Abimelech, king of the Philistines, lived. Now here's where we get even more clear indication that Abimelech was a Philistine. Because here he's called the king of the Philistines. The Lord...
We also get more indication that Isaac didn't like his wife.
Well, yeah, let's see what it says. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt, but do as I tell you. Live here as a foreigner in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. I hereby confirm that I will give all these lands to you and your descendants," or your seed, "just as I solemnly promised Abraham your father. I will cause your descendants to become as numerous as the stars of the sky, and I will give them all these lands. And through your descendants all the nations of the earth will be blessed." So essentially, God is repeating the promise that he made to Isaac's father. And in pretty much the same words, including this line that through your seed or your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Jesus came to this earth in the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it is in that way, then, that all nations of the earth who are allowed to share in the benefits that Christ made possible when he lived here among us, that is how they all are blessed through the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will do this because Abraham listened to me and obeyed all my requirements, commands, decrees, and instructions. Now, this is one of the first more explicit expressions of the covenant that we are going to find God making with the people of Israel. And that is that his blessing, as expressed here anyway, is dependent on their obedience to all his requirements, commands, decrees, instructions, all those different terms that are being used for that. Well, given what has been told him, it tells us that Isaac stayed in Gerar. When the men who lived there asked Isaac about his wife, Rebekah, he said, "She is my sister." He was afraid to say, "She is my wife." He thought, "They will kill me to get her because she is so beautiful." Where have we heard that line before? You ever heard the saying, like father, like son? Here's a very practical example of that. Abraham was afraid of the people, and there may have been some basis in the culture of the times and the history of the times that men may indeed at some point have gotten killed by other men who wanted to have his wife. Well, kill him and then she's free and we can have her. But sometime later, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out his window and saw Isaac caressing Rebekah. So apparently, at least once in a while, the two of them did have their romantic moments. Immediately, Abimelech called for Isaac and exclaimed, "She is obviously your wife. Why did you say she is my sister?" "Because I was afraid someone would kill me to get her from me," Isaac replied. "How could you do this to us?" Abimelech exclaimed. "One of my people might easily have taken your wife and slept with her, and you would have made us guilty of great sin." Then Abimelech issued a public proclamation. "Anyone who touches this man or his wife will be put to death." Now remember, Abraham had entered into a treaty with Abimelech and with Abimelech's people. It had been explicit that Abraham's people and Abraham's descendants wouldn't be picking fights with Abimelech or Abimelech's people or his descendants. So the treaty didn't hold, because we know that later on in the Old Testament there's going to be rivalry between the Philistines and the people of Israel. But at this point, the treaty seems to hold. Although Isaac has kind of messed with it by lying to them, Abimelech has stayed true to it and has said, "All right, I'm issuing a proclamation right now, public decree, you mess with this man or his wife, I'll have your head." So he's honoring the treaty between Abraham and himself. When Isaac planted crops that year, he harvested 100 times more grain than he planted, for the Lord blessed him. He became a very rich man, and his wealth continued to grow. He acquired so many flocks of sheep and goats, herds of cattle, and servants, that the Philistines became jealous of him. So the Philistines filled up all of Isaac's wells with dirt. These were the wells that had been dug by the servants of his father, Abraham. Now, the wording here leads us to believe that perhaps this is after the famine. You don't get 100-fold increase on what you plant during famine years. So apparently this was a very short-lived famine. And the very next year, after Isaac moves in to Gerar with the Philistines, he goes back home to plant his crops and has a very ample return. But the Philistines saw this, and they got bad feelings about it. How often is it in human history and in human dealings that somebody sees somebody else get good things and they get jealous, they get fearful? Well, if this guy gets good things, then there won't be so many good things for me. He's taking what's mine. And they'll even word it that way. That should be mine. You've taken it away from me. Well, in a good year, everybody gets good returns on their agriculture. Why be jealous of that? If somebody does well, rejoice with them. And be nice to them. Maybe they'll help you out if you run into trouble. You make an enemy of him, he's going to be less likely to help you. But, people, we're humans. We don't think that way. Our fear gets in the way, and we quit acting on the basis of love. We act on the basis of fear instead, and that makes problems for us. And part of that is, as we've discussed in the past, when fear gets activated, our rational, logical brains get shut down because of evolution. Evolution has made that part of us, messed with us in that way. So we get triggered by our fears and we quit thinking rationally. We act on the basis of our fears. And that's what's going on here. What good does it do these Philistines to fill up Isaac's wells with dirt? Well, it doesn't help them at all. All it does is harm him. And the logic of that is, why harm somebody else when it's not going to do you any good at all? Or the old, that would be the old dog in the manger idea. The dog can't eat what's in the manger, but he's being selfish about it and standing there barking and keeping the animals away that would eat what was in the manger. In other words, the dog is harming somebody else to no benefit of himself. But there are also cases, we have another metaphor we use: cutting off your nose to spite your face. Hurting yourself in order to harm somebody else. And there may be a sense in which that's the level of what's going on here. Because while it may not have been as big a deal then as it is now, still water was an important resource. And when you block up the wells and fill them up with dirt, you just undone somebody's labor and reduced access to the available water. So you may harm somebody else, but you probably also are harming yourself in the process. Finally, Abimelech ordered Isaac to leave the country. "Go somewhere else," he said, "for you have become too powerful for us." So Isaac moved away to the Gerar Valley, where he set up their tents and settled down. He reopened the wells his father had dug, which the Philistines had filled in after Abraham's death. Isaac also restored the names Abraham had given them. Isaac's servants also dug in the Gerar valley and discovered a well of fresh water. But then the shepherds from Gerar came and claimed the spring. "This is our water," they said, and they argued over it with Isaac's herdsmen. So Isaac named the well Esek, which means argument. Isaac's men then dug another well, but again there was a dispute over it. So Isaac named it Sitnah, which means hostility. Abandoning that one, Isaac moved on and dug another well. This time there was no dispute over it, so Isaac named the place Rehoboth, which means open space. For he said, "At last the Lord has created enough space for us to prosper in this land." From there, Isaac moved to Beersheba. Well, that's where he'd been before, so kind of back where he came from, where the Lord appeared to him on the night of his arrival. "I am the God of your father Abraham," he said. "Do not be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you. I will multiply your descendants, and they will become a great nation. I will do this because of my promise to Abraham, my servant." Then Isaac built an altar there and worshipped the Lord. He set up his camp at that place, and his servants dug another well. Now, nowadays, when we dig wells, we usually actually drill them. We have mechanical equipment that can put a relatively small hole in the ground, a round hole straight down until we reach water. And then you can get a narrow pump, put it down into the water that you reach in that borehole with a pipe on it and electrical wiring on the pipe. And then you can pump water up from that well through the pipe by energizing the wires that go down to the pump motor. And that's what we call a well. Well, they didn't have that technology, so when they built the well, they had to dig a big enough hole, usually with steps going down, to allow people to go down into the well to fill their containers with water and then carry them back out. So that's a lot of digging that they would have had to do. Isaac's covenant with Abimelech. Well, got another covenant going on here. One day, King Abimelech came from Gerar with his advisor Ahuzath, also Phicol, his army commander. "Why have you come here?" Isaac asked. "You obviously hate me since you kicked me off your land." They replied, "We can plainly see that the Lord is with you, so we want to enter into a sworn treaty with you. Let's make a covenant. Swear that you will not harm us, just as we have never troubled you." Oops. Huh? We have never troubled you? We filled in your wells, but don't count that. We've never troubled you. Anyway. We have always treated you well. Well, that it wouldn't come across in Hebrew like it does in English. In English, that's a pun. We've treated you well by filling in your well. Anyway. And we sent you away from us in peace. And now look how the Lord has blessed you. So Isaac prepared a covenant feast to celebrate the treaty, and they ate and drank together. Isaac didn't make a big deal about their duplicity here. He didn't make a big deal about the wells, so he was willing to forgive, apparently. Anyway, they had this big feast, and they agreed to this covenant. Early the next morning, they each took a solemn oath not to interfere with each other. Then Isaac sent them home again, and they left him in peace. Now, we could speculate on the motives Abimelech and his top leaders had in making a covenant with Isaac. Recall the nature of human interaction in that culture and in that part of the world. I mean, look at that part of the world today. It hasn't changed a whole lot. Everybody's armed to the teeth and at each other's throats. And in that situation, then fear is going to drive you to demand certain things of your government or to do things in certain ways in order to protect your interests and to help you feel, well, not safe, but as safe as you can feel given the situation that you're in. So Isaac is getting wealthy. Isaac is getting blessings and getting lots of food and lots of servants and lots of flocks, lots of animals. And that makes him powerful. And they know they've acted foolishly and given Isaac cause to resent them. And now they want some kind of protection. Yeah. We've done something stupid. We have done the FAFO, if you know what that means. And we don't like the consequences we've earned ourselves. Can you deliver us from that? So they come and they make a covenant, and Isaac agrees to it. Isaac sent them home again. They left him in peace. So now for a second time, we have seen a covenant made between the Philistines and the ancestors to Israel. That very day, Isaac's servants came and told him about a new well they had dug. "We found water," they exclaimed. So Isaac named the well Sheba, which means oath. And to this day, the town that grew up there is called Beer-sheba, which means well of the oath. Now, we've already read about Beersheba earlier in the narrative. Clearly, that's a case of using the name that the people who will read the book are familiar with to name a place, even though at the time of the story that you're telling, the place didn't have that name. At the age of 40, Esau married 2 Hittite wives, Judith, the daughter of Beeri, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon. But Esau's wives made life miserable for Isaac and Rebekah. In-law troubles. Exactly how this takes place, we aren't told. Now, this is when Esau is 40. So remember that Isaac was 60 when his sons were born. So Esau gets married to these 2 Canaanite women when his dad is 100. But Isaac and Rebekah both disliked the wives. This is going to come up again as we go on through these chapters. And I'm looking and thinking, yeah, we probably have time for one more chapter. So let's go on to Genesis 27. One day, when Isaac was old and turning blind, he called for Esau, his older son, and said, "My son." "Yes, father," Esau replied. "I am an old man now," Isaac said, "and I don't know when I may die. Take your bow and a quiver full of arrows and go out into the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare my favorite dish and bring it here for me to eat. Then I will pronounce the blessing that belongs to you, my firstborn son, before I die." Now, I suppose it would be possible, and I'm not going to say that traditional interpretation has been proven wrong. No, I'm not going to say that. That the blessing that Isaac wants to pronounce here is the very blessing that Esau has already sold. One of the reasons I don't think so is that it tells us in that previous narrative that Esau showed contempt for his birthright. The part that he sold to Jacob wasn't that important to him. He didn't really care for it. But now his father is offering a blessing. And we're about to see that that is very important to Esau. It is also very evident here that Isaac intends to pronounce this blessing, whatever it is, on Esau. But Rebekah overheard what Isaac had said to his son Esau. So when Esau left to hunt for the wild game, she said to her son Jacob, "Listen, I overheard your father say to Esau, 'Bring me some wild game and prepare me a delicious meal. Then I will bless you in the Lord's presence before I die.' Now, my son, listen to me. Do exactly as I tell you. Go out to the flocks and bring me 2 fine young goats. I'll use them to prepare your father's favorite dish. Then take the food to your father so he can eat it and bless you before he dies." "But look," Jacob replied to Rebekah, "my brother Esau is a hairy man and my skin is smooth. What if my father touches me? He'll see that I'm trying to trick him, and then he'll curse me instead of blessing me." But his mother replied, "Then let the curse fall on me, my son. Just do what I tell you. Go out and get the goats for me." Now, the traditional interpretation generally holds that God intended for Jacob to be the descendant of Isaac that gets counted for purposes of being the ancestor to God's chosen nation. And a lot of people will read what the Lord told Rebekah about her twin sons as an indication that God intended Jacob to get that benefit, to become the ancestor to God's chosen nation, because he said that the elder would serve the younger. And when we look at that from the human perspective, that makes the elder less important, lesser than the younger. And because the elder serves the younger, that makes the younger greater. And God certainly intended his people to be greater, right? So in saying that, the traditional interpretation says, God was indicating his choice of Jacob to be the ancestor to the chosen nation. But let me suggest an alternative way of understanding this. As we have already suggested, in God's design of society, the greater serve the lesser. We found that in Hebrews, where Hebrews said very specifically that mankind was created a little bit lower than the angels. And then goes on to say that the angels serve humanity. The greater serve the lesser. Jesus came to this earth and claimed to be the Son of God. And he called on people to come to him to receive life, as we discussed in our sermon presentation just under a week ago. And yet, Jesus stood among his apostles as one who served. He did the lowest job of them all. He washed their nasty, gunky feet. The greater serve the lesser. God, the Creator, serves those he created. That's the way things work in heaven. So, when the Lord tells Rebekah that the elder would serve the younger, he was telling her that the older will be the greater one than the younger. But you see, in her mind, Rebekah couldn't see that. She couldn't get that. She'd been raised by Bethuel and as the sister to Laban, who we're going to get more on his character as we go on through the book of Genesis. And so she's in a very different mindset. She's in the mindset of the human culture, which if you get great, then you have the power to make other people do what you want. And they serve you, and that makes you greater. So in her mind, if the elder were to serve the younger, then the younger had to be greater, and she did not think it appropriate for the blessing that would indicate who should become the ancestor to the chosen nation would go to Esau, the son she didn't like, the son who made her life miserable when he married those Hittite wives. No, she felt like she had to do something about that. Now, another thing about the elder serving the younger. God had a plan to lead his chosen nation through an experience of servitude followed by deliverance. Now, as we know from reading on in the Old Testament, most of us are familiar enough with the story to know what's going to happen. We know that the descendants of Jacob ended up going down to Egypt, and that there the nation became a nation of slaves in Egypt. And then they were delivered. Moses came and served as the agent of God to deliver his people from their slavery and bondage in Egypt. But guess what happened while they were in Egypt? They learned idolatry. And idolatry would be the scourge of the chosen nation from the day they left Egypt until the day they went captive into Babylon. A period of nearly 1,000 years. Approximately 1,000 years. It might have been a little bit over. A very long time. This was a problem for the chosen nation. Idolatry that they learned in Egypt. Now, let's suppose that Isaac was able to do what he intended to do and give this blessing to Esau rather than to Jacob. And so the people of Esau became the chosen nation. And what did it say? The nations would be in conflict with each other, and the elder, the chosen nation, would serve the younger, the Jacobites. What is the likelihood, even given what we're going to read coming up here, that the Jacobites would have led the Edomites, that's what Esau's descendants became known as, into idolatry? Idolatry came from Egypt. If God had been able to give his chosen nation an experience of servitude and deliverance amongst their brothers, the Jacobites, without them having to go Egypt, he might have been able to avoid the plague of idolatry that was a scourge on the nation for some 1,000 years. And if you see it in that light, the traditional interpretation is that, Rebekah used the wrong means, but she got the right thing done. But if you look at the interpretation as I'm giving it, you can't get the right result by doing the wrong thing. One thing that's going on here, obviously, is Rebekah is showing a lack of trust in God. If God wanted Jacob to get this blessing, he could have seen to it. And maybe Rebekah has gotten to this point thinking that despite what she knows about her husband, that somehow he'll come around to seeing things her way and giving her favored son the blessing. Well, now he's actually sent Esau out to hunt wild game to fix him a meal to precede giving the blessing. And she said, I can't wait any longer. If I wait any longer, my favorite son is not going to get this blessing. I've got to do something about it. And so she is about to resort to deception. She is going to deceive, and interpret that as lie to, if you wish, her own husband. Now, Jacob has said, What's going to happen here if he touches me? Well, Mom has a plan. Reading on then, verse 14. So Jacob went out and got the young goats for his mother. Rebekah took them and prepared a delicious meal just the way Isaac liked it. Well, she didn't know that much about her husband. She knew what he liked. Then she took Esau's favorite clothes, which were there in the house, and gave them to her younger son Jacob. She covered his arms and the smooth part of his neck with the skin of the young goats. Then she gave Jacob a delicious meal, including freshly baked bread. So Jacob took the food to his father. "My father," he said. "Yes, my son," Isaac answered. "Who are you, Esau or Jacob?" Isaac has doubts here, but for some reason, they never bear fruit. He asks me, you're messing around with things that aren't stable and they're falling away on you. Got a cat up there trying to jump around in boxes, and some of them are empty and they don't sit still when you jump from them. Anyway, so Jacob's brought up this issue of not being hairy like his brother. And so her solution is to cover him with goat skins so that he'll feel hairy to his dad. So Isaac, this doesn't sound right. "Who are you, Esau or Jacob?" Jacob replied, "It's Esau, your firstborn son. I've done as you told me. Here is the wild game. Now sit up and eat it so you can give me your blessing." Isaac asked, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" I mean, he'd sent his son out to hunt some wild game. Normally that took a while. Well, if you're going to get a domesticated animal and slaughter it and prepare food from its meat, you can do that pretty quickly. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Oh, wait a minute. The Lord your God put it in my path," Jacob replied. "We have bumped into this before in some instances. Listen to the language here. The Lord your God put it in my path," Jacob replied. Now, he's trying to sound religious and sanctimonious in all this, and may even be succeeding to some extent, but he gives something away in his language. We'll see this in other places. The Lord your God, huh? So, God made you, but he didn't make me? Is that what you're saying? No, that doesn't make sense. God likes you, but he doesn't like me? Well, we know that God loves unconditionally. So what's he saying here? He's saying that he himself has a lack of connection with his own creator. He doesn't call it the Lord my God, it's the Lord your God. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come closer so I can touch you and make sure that you really are Esau." So Jacob went closer to his father, and Isaac touched him. The voice is Jacob's, but the hands are Esau's, Isaac said. But he did not recognize Jacob because Jacob's hands felt hairy just like Esau's. So Isaac prepared to bless Jacob. "But are you really my son Esau?" he answered. He's still smelling a rat here. Yes, I am, Jacob replied. Then Isaac said, Now, my son, bring me the wild game. Let me eat it, and then I will give you my blessing. So Jacob took the food to his father, and Isaac ate it. He also drank the wine that Jacob served him. Then Isaac said to Jacob, Please, come a little closer and kiss me, my son. So Jacob went over and kissed him. And when Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, whose clothes was he wearing? Do you remember? When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he was finally convinced, and he blessed his son. He said, Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of the outdoors, which the Lord has blessed. From the dew of heaven and the richness of the earth, may God always give you abundant harvests of grain and bountiful new wine. May many nations become your servants, and may they bow down to you. May you be the master over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. All who curse you will be cursed, and all who bless you will be blessed. Now, who does Isaac have in mind as he pronounces this blessing, including elements of the covenant that the Creator had made with his father and with him? Well, he thinks he's talking about Esau. He thinks he's talking to Esau. But then we read on. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and almost before Jacob had left his father, Esau returned from his hunt. Esau prepared the delicious meal and brought it to his father. And then he said, Sit up, my father, and eat my wild game, so you can give me your blessing. But Isaac asked him, Who are you? Esau replied, It's your son, your firstborn son, Esau. Isaac began to tremble uncontrollably and said, Then who just served me wild game? I have already eaten it, and I blessed him just before you came. And yes, that blessing must stand. I sense a hint of mysticism here. He's pronounced the blessing. He's just discovered that he'd been tricked into giving the blessing to the son he didn't intend to give it to, but now he feels like he can't undo it. That sounds like a belief in mysticism. And, there was probably a certain level of mystical belief in the culture around them, and it affected their thinking. So when Esau heard his father's words, he let out a loud and bitter cry. This doesn't sound like someone who despised this blessing. And that's why I think they're different things. He despised the rights of the firstborn. That didn't appeal to him. But this blessing, becoming the father of the chosen nation, the priesthood rights, if you wish. My wife mentioned that. I'll talk about that in a moment. That he wants. And he wants it so badly that he lets out a loud and bitter cry when he learns that he's been cheated of it. Oh, my father, what about me? Bless me too, he begged. But Isaac said, Your brother was here and he tricked me. He has taken away your blessing. Esau exclaimed. "No wonder his name is Jacob, for now he has cheated me twice." Huh. First, he took my rights as the firstborn, and now he has stolen my blessing. There again, we see a difference in the language. Another reason for me to believe that we're dealing with two different things here. He cheated him twice. First, he cheated him out of the rights of the firstborn, or his birthright, as we sometimes call it. He despised that. That wasn't a big deal to him. Okay, you can have it. It won't do me any good if I die. Feed me. But now he wants the blessing, and his brother has cheated him out of that as well. The supplanter, the one who grasped the heel. He's aptly named, Esau says. Now he has stolen my blessing. Oh, haven't you saved even one blessing for me? Isaac said to Esau, I have made Jacob your master and have declared that all his brothers will be his servants. I have guaranteed him an abundance of grain and wine. What is left for me to give you, my son? But Esau pleaded, Do you have only one blessing? Oh, my father, bless me too. Then Esau broke down and wept. Finally, his father Isaac said to him, You will live away from the richness of the earth and away from the dew of the heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you decide to break free, you will shake his yoke from your neck. And there was a period of time in the history of the nation of Israel when the Edomites were subject to Israel. But it wouldn't last. At some point in time, they would rebel, they would get their freedom, and they would be forever free from there on out. From that time on, Esau hated Jacob because their father had given Jacob the blessing. And Esau began to scheme. I will soon be mourning my father's death. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. Now, I won't go into the math of it at this point. We don't know for certain when this took place, but it seems likely that this is pretty close to the time when Jacob leaves, as we're about to read here. And like I say, I won't take the time to go into the math because I haven't done it all recently, and I don't know where to find all the references. But it works out that at this time, when Jacob flees from the home he grew up in, that he's somewhere between 70 and 80 years old. Now, the twins were born when their dad was 60. Esau got married when his dad was 100. If he's 80, that means dad's now, 60 and 80. Dad's about 140 years old. Getting close to it. At any rate, there are at least 20 more years left on his lifespan. But Esau begins to scheme. I won't do it while my dad's alive, but once he dies. But Rebekah heard about Esau's plan. So she sent for Jacob and told him, "Listen, Esau is consoling himself by plotting to kill you. So listen carefully, my son. Get ready and flee to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay there with him until your brother cools off. When he calms down and forgets what you have done to him, I will send for you to come back. Why should I lose both of you in one day?" So Rebekah is going to send her son off. But listen to what she does here in the last verse of this chapter. Then Rebekah said to Isaac, "I'm sick and tired of these local Hittite women. I would rather die than see Jacob marry one of them." Now, earlier we read that these two ladies made life difficult for both Isaac and Rebekah. But Rebekah now is going to use this as an excuse to get her husband to agree to let her send Jacob away. She's doing it to protect Jacob from Esau, and apparently she doesn't want to tell Isaac what Esau is planning. Of course, she may have believed that Isaac wouldn't believe her anyway because Esau was his favorite boy, right? So, I see we've run just a little bit over here from our usual hour and a half timing. We got to the end of this chapter. We are kind of in the middle of the story, but that's where we are. And we will continue the story of this messed up, dysfunctional, abusive family next week when we continue. And I think my wife went to sleep some time ago. I haven't heard from her in a while. So until that time next week, we say goodbye and God bless.